Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. First of all, a programming note. We have not yet hit 4,000 subscribers, so still no, yesterday there was no, or the day before, I guess, there was no 4,000 subscriber live stream yet, but as soon as we hit 4,000, it's going to happen sooner or later. There will be. Another note before I go into my main topic: Invisible College selling really well, still doing really well in the high ranks of the OSR sales and drive-through. But we did have a few problems last week. We've got some issues with drive-through's printer, or rather my publisher does. And as of right now, I believe that the publisher has removed the black and white printed edition of the Invisible College and the premium color hardcover, which I guess means that if you got either of those, it's sort of a collector's edition now. I don't have anything to do with the decision of that process. So if you were hoping for a premium color hardcover, I guess, and you didn't get it already, that's kind of too bad. But I understand that the quality of the premium color hardcover that Drive-Thru did was not up to the publisher's standard. And hopefully, maybe, Amazon CreateSpace is doing a pilot program right now that we aren't in, that my publisher isn't in, that will eventually allow for hardcover copies of CreateSpace books. So we have the Invisible College, as you know, is on Amazon, and they have a color edition. It's actually this one here that has a very nice color, but it's soft cover right now. If the pilot project goes, global and Amazon allows us to make one, I'm pretty sure that the publisher is going to do a premium color hardcover there, because I think the publisher is quite happy with the color quality of the Amazon edition. So that might still come in the future, but we don't know when. That's up to Amazon. Sorry about that if you were hoping for it beforehand. It's a pity, but not much we can do. Oh, also, World of the Last Sun, Gonzo OSR Gaming is it's an Electrum bestseller now. It's doing really well too. So be sure to check it out. I think it's an Electrum bestseller. Is that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And Cults of Chaos, which I don't have here, is now a gold bestseller, which is awesome because it's a small product, but it's probably one of my best products ever, with a whole setup of how to create your own sinister cults with everything you need to do for them, and you can roll them up really fast, and every single time it's going to be different, and they're all very coherent to the context of a medieval society, but you can use them in pretty much any OSR game. So anyways, check all that out. As usual, if you want to support me, pick up my products. On to the main topic. I'm well known for arguing with the SJWs, who have certain ridiculous perspectives on role-playing and other things too. But once in a while I get caught up in these huge flame wars with people on the other side of the spectrum. They're still on that spectrum, I guess, but just on the other side of it. And they're people that look at me and call me, a godless occultist left-winger, because I'm not an ultra-Catholic or something like that, And those guys claim to be a kind of a type of OSR, but it's nothing to do with the OSR I make. And frankly, it's a case of which way Western man, right? And I'm sure that their argument is that their way is the one true pure way, but it's actually kind of sad when you look at it. So, the OSR has had this challenge almost from its inception. When it was created, a little bit of history for you guys, the OSR was made originally by some people that all they wanted to do, this was back before the PDF version, or to say nothing of print-on-demand versions of older editions of D&D, were totally unavailable. There were no D&D reprints. It was before the first edition reprints. It was before the reprint of the original rules box set. It was before you had any easy way to get any of these products. Today, you can, theoretically go on drive-thru and buy a print edition of the Rule Cyclopedia or, AD&D or whatever. But back then you couldn't. They didn't have that. And so those rule sets, when they were found, were only available in used stores, and you had to buy what you could get, and sometimes they weren't in great condition, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult. So the origin of the OSR, on the one hand, was from a bunch of people who said, well, let's just make these old rule sets over again. Let's rewrite them, because you can't copyright a book, right? So you can't copyright game rules, rather. And so we're going to make it all the same rules, but just rewritten and publish them, under things like Osric and Labyrinth Lord and Swords and Wizardry, which take the place of, first edition AD&D or basic expert D&D or original edition D&D. But they were basically the same game, just with a reskin. And then the other side of the old school, of the original OSR, was a product of a few games that were kind of an inspiration for the idea of taking the original rules and modifying them to fit specific purposes, but staying within the boundaries of the original format of the old school rules. And at the same time that proto-OSR made out of cloning old rule books was happening, there's also an old school movement that was being started really by kind of three products. The first was Hackmaster 4th edition, I think it was, the one that came out in the 2000s, which was the first edition AD&D rules with a bunch of stuff added and slightly changed and given a much more humoristic tone. But it was in many ways kind of like a reprint of the first edition AD&D rules, but more cleaned up and with some slightly more gonzo elements to it. And it was a very successful product. And the second was, I think, called Mazes and Minotaurs, which was basically like a D&D rule set with the presumption of what if D&D had been based on Greek myth instead of like medieval fantasy. And then the third book of this old time was Encounter Critical, which was written by the great S. John Ross, but it was originally presented as if it had been a book that had been found in some garage sale that was a cheap printing, like in stapled pamphlet form of some homebrew D&D variant that was created by a couple of guys in the very early 80s, right? So it was like a long lost ancient book, and it was just, gonzo as all hell, and it was really brilliant. And you looked at it, and it was so exciting. And then later on, when I looked at it, actually, even from the first time I read it, but it fooled a lot of people. And I admit I wasn't completely sure, but I looked at it and said, this is just too perfect to be actually true, right? Like I'd read a lot of the old sort of pseudo D&D books that came out in the late 70s and early 80s. I'd never heard of Encounter Critical, which didn't make it impossible that it existed, because there was a lot of games that were published, 1,000 pamphlet copies in some guy's basement and that were never seen again. But this one just seemed a little too perfect in how it just captured the old school feel, right? And of course, later on, the author admitted that he had made it up, but it was like an homage to all those crazy old school rules modders that existed in the before days. So those three products kind of inspired this idea of making games that were based on D&D, but that weren't just clones of D&D. And those two concepts clashed for a long time, with the first period of the OSR largely having been dominated by the clone games and adventures written for those clone games. It was really around 2008 that Lamentations of the Flame Princess came out, and they started making that started making rule sets that were not just copies of the old rules, but rather were something really original that was taking the OSR concept and expanding it further by making by making new sets that fulfilled specific purposes, right? So Arrows of Indra was another example that would take the D&D rule set and would make it fit to epic Indian myth. And there were lots of other ones like that, right? Stars Without Number took the D&D rule set and made it into a science fiction, kind of classic science fiction game. And so on and so forth. And I talk about this already in one of my earliest videos way back before. If you search back on this channel to a video, I think it's called OSR's Cutting Edge and Will Change the Way You Think About D&D. Just way too long a title. You can see where I talk all about these various games and how they evolve. But the thing is, nowadays the clone period is pretty much over. But what you do still have is this like rump remnant that came out of that clone period, that were people that were convinced that the original first edition was the purest and perfect version of D&D as Gygax intended it, And this is tied in with people who tend to have very socially conservative politics for some reason. I guess it's largely because of the people who are the protagonists of that particular movement. And we've clashed many a times. But the thing is, I used to call these guys the OSR Taliban, and there's, considering that they've been in the news recently, the reason for that wasn't just as kind of a gratuitous insult, but it's because of what groups like the Taliban or Al-Qaeda are. And you see the same thing in kind of these neo-monarchist ultra-conservatives, right, that are like just bizarre kind of guys that are like, restore the monarchy, the democracy was a mistake sort of guys, right? People that are anti-enlightenment, right? That they think that the Western world was at its best when everybody was dying of the Black Death. In that, just like them, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, they create this vision of a mythical golden age that never really existed in that way, and that they see as having been the glorious period. It's funny though, because like Western paleo-monarchists look back at a time when Europe was really a very second-rate kind of crap show, right? At least the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, these guys look back to the Muslim world and they say, well, we look back at our golden age. It was the glorious caliphate in Baghdad or the great city of Cordoba, where we were the center of the world, where we were like the great and glorious civilization. And we're going to recreate that now by trying to make everything be just like it was back then, exactly like that, and not allowing any kind of changes. And of course, that's how they get it wrong, right? Because the things that made, Baghdad or Cordoba or Rome, these great centers of ancient civilization, so glorious, was actually that they were these dynamic civilizations that were constantly exploring and understanding and developing and innovating. And they're like, oh no, that was just all a mistake, right? So they're actually betraying the very concept of the time that they're claiming to want to fight to restore. It's ridiculous. But I've kind of thought of another analogy for this idea, which is that, there's a term in religious studies called the cargo cult. And the classic example of this has to do with this little island in the Pacific, that during World War II, some Americans landed there. They set up a little base. They set up a radio station. They had the American flag. And they, during the Pacific Theater of Operations, it was like a communications area that they'd set up there. And they were there for a couple of years. And then they left, and they left their stuff behind. And now to the people that lived there, these guys seemed incredible, right? Like they had things that, moved through the sea like they never understood. They could fly through the air. And they had these guys that would speak into a box and a voice would speak back at them. And so they had these magic powers. They did these rituals where they would raise this colored cloth into the air every morning and do special signs to it. And then they would go speak in the box, and the box would speak back with the voice of the spirits to them. And so when the GIs all left all that stuff, it didn't work anymore. Of course, like, they didn't have any, they didn't have electricity or anything like that. So they started to make a religion, thinking that they were continuing what these men had done and honoring the spirits by doing this. And so like every day, these people, these tribesmen in this island would raise the flag and salute the flag, and they would use language that they understood, like the handful of English words that they'd learn, sergeant and stuff like that, and those were the titles of their special people, their chieftain or whatever. Then the priest would go and he'd fiddle with the knobs on this ancient radio and talk into it, as if waiting for a response from the spirits. And really, what that kind of OSR, that kind of perspective on the OSR is a cargo cult. It looks at this product, AD&D First Edition, which was written by Gary Gygax, but Gary Gygax never played AD&D First Edition. He didn't think it was the be-all and end-all of existence. Gary Gygax played his homebrew game of D&D based mainly on old D&D, the pre-First Edition D&D, with his own set of rules, his own ideas. He never played it rules as written, which is what these guys insist. They say you have to play AD&D First Edition, rules as written, nothing else. That's all that's allowed, right? And this kind of closed mentality is not genuine old school, because what it loses is the fact that at that time, everybody, including Gary Gygax, but also including everybody else in the goddamn hobby, was innovating and creating new ideas with the core concepts that had been started by D&D. So they were making all kinds of interesting games and settings and rules and mechanics that a lot of which, especially in the earlier periods, were largely compatible with D&D. First edition was created for mainly two reasons. And the reason that in it, Gary Gygax writes as though saying, well, you should always, follow these rules as written to the letter, no changes, is because AD&D was largely produced in order to permit tournament play in conventions, where obviously everybody had to follow the same set of rules in order to make sure that you were fairly judging the outcome of tournament competitive adventure module play, right? And second, because it was a business decision. TSR was losing money to third-party products. And so he wanted to say, well, at a table, you're not allowed to have third party. He was the first guy that did this, right? That said, no, you have to follow the rules exactly as they are. And you're not allowed to use non-licensed products, because those products are no good, bad products that will ruin your game, right? So you only have to lay it the way it's written here. But he himself never did that, right? He didn't believe in it. He said it for business reasons. Sorry, I'm preparing my yerba mate here. So these guys are venerating a prophet and a holy book, right? That they don't understand. They don't understand why it existed. They didn't understand what it's for, right? And they don't realize that the guy who made it didn't believe what he had written there. And so that's one choice. The other choice is the OSR that's all about testing the boundaries of the D&D rule set, making stuff that goes off in interesting new directions while maintaining the compatibility between systems, right? Not only, for example, are like in stuff in Invisible College and Lion and Dragon fundamentally compatible with each other. I mean, that would make sense because they're my own books, but they're fundamentally compatible with stuff in other OSR books that I didn't make. And you can feel free to mix and match whatever, right? Like since Invisible College came out, Eric Fabiashi has done a couple of, and I think a couple of other guys have too, have been doing some really weird pastiches of combining the Invisible College with other games. Somebody the other day talked about running Lion and Dragon, medieval authentic role-playing, in combination with Spelljammer as a setting, right? These are really exciting ideas. These are things that are cool, right? And of course, I'm not telling you, no, you must only play my games, rules as written. Not at all. And one of these guys actually tried to trip me up. He said, well, what would they change out of your game that would make it not your game anymore? And I'm like, nothing. You could change whatever you want to, right? That doesn't even factor into my mentality, because it's the OSR. As long as you're still using stuff from my book, you're using stuff from my book. And as long as you're still using the fundamental skeletal rules of D&D, right? The 3d6, 6 ability scores, D20 to hit versus armor class, hit points, saving throws. As long as those things are in there, you're still playing an OSR game. And it might be a combination of my books and other books, but who cares, right? That's the way that you create stuff that moves forward. And so in your mentality as a gamer and as a game purchaser, I would suggest that you look at those possibilities. Far from telling you don't ever change what you're doing, play only the way that is authorized to you or something like that, or to like falsely venerate some particular moment of old school. What I'm saying to you is find all the combinations, all the possibilities of how you can make your books, how you can maximize their use in all kinds of weird and interesting ways. Modify them with your own house rules, right? I'm very happy to hear about all these really interesting combos and mods and how people are running stuff. There's some people that want to run the Invisible College, that they want to run it as a spy game based, like my last video, which by the way had terrible views, but I think it's because of like some of the keywords that are in there. I think that it really didn't help the algorithm because I was talking about conspiracies and stuff, and intelligence agencies. But like some of them would like to run a game where they're, part of the intelligence agency, and not part of the, some intelligence agency or another, and not part of the Invisible College. I had other people suggesting, well, can you do one where you're playing, agents of the Vatican hunting down occultists? Yeah, I guess if you want to, you totally can. Sure, why not? If you can figure out how to make that work, great. You can combine whatever you want. This is the way that you go forward. And what would unbelievably make me happy, what I would be really pleased as punch to see is someone producing either a source book or a rule book or an adventure or something like that, where they very clearly drew inspiration from some of the stuff I wrote, but made their own thing and made it their own and made something different that was nevertheless, inspired by some of my things, the way I've been inspired by other people, and making stuff that is new and interesting. And like the icing on the cake would be if it was something that was so awesome that then I would turn around and be able to use that, right? And use that in my gaming and maybe use that as inspiration for some future product of my own, right? That is what makes the OSR so exciting and makes it the vanguard of game design today in the TTRPG field, in the role-playing arena. So yeah, don't make your gaming, either your gaming or your gaming ideology or your game purchases, into a kind of a cargo cult, right? And don't limit yourself in terms of how you can choose to mix and match the stuff that you have and find new directions and employ house rules. Because believe me, that's what Gygax did. That's what Arneson did. That's what everybody was actually doing in the old school. Nobody in the old school was obsessed with maintaining purity, right? Everybody in the old school, in the real old school, back in the original time, was thinking of new ideas. And that's what we want to do today too. So I guess that's everything. I've already, promoted my games at the start of the video. If you want to support me, buy my products. That's the best way to do it. I mean, I do have a Patreon, but I don't do anything on it. But if you've bought every product I have and want to support me there, you can find it in the link in the description. And if not, you can find all my game products in the description, including my PDF series, RPG Pundit Presents. There's 105 issues there, so you're bound to find something that you can find, that you can put into your games, or mix them in with my games, or mix them in with other people's games, and make interesting stuff for your campaigns, and maybe share about that with the rest of the OSR. So be sure to tell me about that if you do. And please feel free to share this video wherever you like, especially where it might piss some people off. I don't know who it'll piss off more. I don't know who'd be more upset about it, whether it would be the paleo-conservative OSR, extremists who are pissed off at me, or if it would even piss off the SJWs more, knowing that someone else thinks I'm a raging liberal. But I guess that's the way it goes, right? If I've managed to piss off every extremist in every direction, then I'm probably doing something really right. So I guess that's it for today. Share the video everywhere. Be sure to like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Help us get up to that 4,000 mark. currently smoking Lorenzetti Solitario Egg and Argento Natural.